Harrison Ford held the letter with a serious expression, while Steve Harvey smiled, expecting some fun surprise. But what happened exceeded all expectations. As he finished reading, Harrison calmly stood up and walked off stage, leaving Steve and the audience completely speechless. The murmur grew in the crowd, trying to understand the impact of the letter. Steve Harvey remained in shock, not knowing how to react, while everyone realized they had witnessed a truly unexpected and unique moment. The stage lights felt hotter than usual that Tuesday night. Steve Harvey adjusted his burgundy suit jacket, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and prepared for what his producers promised would be a standard celebrity interview segment. Harrison Ford sat across from him in the guest chair, looking exactly as America expected him to look. Slightly irritated, perpetually skeptical, and wearing that same leather jacket he'd probably owned since the 80s. The audience was primed, phones confiscated per studio policy, ready to witness whatever verbal sparring match these two would engage in. Steve had done this dance 1,000 times. He knew how to make celebrities comfortable, how to extract the perfect soundbite, how to time a joke so precisely that the laughter would cascade through the room like a controlled avalanche. But something felt different tonight. Harrison's jaw was set tighter than normal. His eyes kept drifting to the blue envelope sitting on Steve's desk, the one the producers had placed there without explanation, simply instructing Steve to hand it to Harrison at the 12-minute mark of the interview. Steve leaned forward, flashing that megawatt smile that had built an empire. "Now, Harrison, before we get into your new project, I've been told there's something special waiting for you tonight." He picked up the envelope with theatrical flair, holding it up so the cameras could capture every angle. "This arrived at the studio 3 days ago. No return address. Just your name and a note saying it should be opened on live television." Steve's eyebrows performed their famous dance of curiosity and mischief. "You know anything about this?" "Before we continue with what happened next, let me ask you something. If you're enjoying this story and want to see more unexpected moments like this one, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me what city or state you're watching from. I want to know where my audience is scattered across this beautiful country. Now back to the most uncomfortable moment in talk show history." Harrison's hand trembled slightly as he took the envelope. Not the kind of tremble that comes from age or weakness, but the kind that comes from recognition. Steve noticed it immediately. His smile faltered for half a second before his professional instincts kicked back in. The audience noticed too, that collective intake of breath when thousands of people simultaneously sense that entertainment is about to transform into something else entirely. Something raw, something unscripted in a world where everything is scripted down to the spontaneous laughter. Harrison's fingers worked slowly at the seal. The envelope was expensive paper, the kind that people use when words matter more than usual. He pulled out 2 sheets, handwritten in blue ink, and his eyes began moving across the lines. Steve watched his face. The cameras watched his face. 40 million people watching at home on their screens watched his face, and what they saw was a man confronting something he'd buried deep enough to forget it was still breathing. The first 30 seconds of reading, Harrison's expression remained neutral, professional, the face he'd used in 100 movies to convey stoic determination. Then something shifted. His left eye twitched once, twice. His breathing pattern changed, becoming shallower, more controlled, like someone trying not to react to cold water being poured slowly down their spine. Steve leaned back in his chair, suddenly aware that his role had changed from host to witness. The audience shifted from excited to concerned, that primal instinct that tells prey when the predator has entered the clearing. Harrison read the entire letter. It took 3 minutes and 47 seconds. The producers would later call it the longest uninterrupted silence in late-night television history. No commercial break, no witty interjection, just the quiet sound of paper rustling and Harrison Ford's carefully measured breathing. When he finished, he folded the letter precisely, creasing it along the original lines, and placed it back in the envelope with the kind of care people reserve for explosives or sacred texts. Then he stood up. Not dramatically, not with anger or tears or any of the emotional fireworks that would have made sense to the audience. He simply stood, looked at Steve Harvey with eyes that had gone somewhere very far away, and said 4 words that would be replayed 10 million times across social media before sunrise. "I need to go." Steve's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His brain, usually 3 steps ahead of every conversation, had completely stalled. Harrison removed the lapel microphone with practiced efficiency, the way someone who'd worn hundreds of microphones would, and handed it to the stage assistant, who appeared from the wings like a ghost, equally confused. The audience sat frozen in their seats, unsure if this was part of the show or if they were watching a man have some kind of breakdown in real time. Harrison walked. Not rushed, not slow. Just walked with the deliberate pace of someone who had made a decision and would not be negotiating the terms. His boots made hollow sounds against the stage floor. Each step echoed in the silence like a countdown to something nobody could name. He reached the wings, paused for the briefest moment as if considering turning back, then disappeared behind the curtain. Gone. Like a magic trick where the magician forgets to reappear. Steve Harvey sat alone at his desk, the envelope now somehow in his hands, though he couldn't remember Harrison giving it to him. The cameras didn't cut away. The producers didn't call for commercial. Everyone was paralyzed by the same question. What the hell just happened? Steve finally found his voice, though it came out rougher than his usual smooth baritone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break. I think we all need a moment to process whatever that was." Duh. But they didn't cut to commercial. Not yet, because Steve Harvey, who had built his entire career on never being at a loss for words, did something he'd never done before. He looked directly into camera one, bypassing all the professional distance that usually exists between host and audience, and spoke with raw honesty. "I don't know what was in that letter. I don't know if I should read it. I don't know if Harrison wants anyone to read it. But I know that what we just saw was real." That wasn't acting. That was a man confronting something that hurt. The commercial break finally came. Backstage descended into controlled chaos. Producers sprinted down hallways. Security checked every exit. Harrison Ford's publicist, a woman named Margaret who'd spent 23 years managing his public image, stood in the green room with her phone pressed so hard against her ear it left a red mark. Harrison was nowhere to be found. Not in his dressing room. Not in the parking lot. Not in any of the usual places celebrities hide when they need 60 seconds away from the performance. He'd vanished as completely as if he'd never been there at all. The stage manager found his leather jacket still draped over the guest chair, which somehow made everything worse. People don't leave their favorite jackets behind unless they're running from something more important than comfort. The envelope sat on Steve's desk like evidence at a crime scene. Steve stood over it, hands in his pockets, staring at it with the kind of intensity usually reserved for poker opponents or medical test results. His executive producer, a sharp woman named Teresa, who'd worked in television since the 90s, approached carefully. "Steve, we have options. We can say it was a bit, we can laugh it off. We can edit it down in post, or—" She paused, choosing her next words with surgical precision. "We can leave it exactly as it happened and let people see something true for once." Steve picked up the envelope, turned it over in his hands. The paper felt heavier than it should, the way truth always weighs more than lies. "Did anyone read this before we went live?" Teresa shook her head. It came with explicit instructions, for Harrison's eyes only, to be opened on air, nothing else. "We authenticated that it wasn't dangerous, but we didn't read the contents. That felt like crossing a line. The audience had been asked to remain seated, though several people had started leaving, confused and unsettled by the incomplete narrative they'd witnessed. The warm-up comedian tried making jokes to ease the tension, but his voice sounded hollow against the weight of what everyone had just experienced. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was witnessing someone's private pain made accidentally public, and nobody quite knew how to process that. Steve made a decision. He walked back onto stage, the envelope still in his hand, and addressed the remaining audience directly. The cameras rolled, capturing everything. "I'm going to be straight with you. I've been doing this for 26 years. I've interviewed presidents, comedians, musicians, actors, regular people with extraordinary stories. I've seen tears. I've seen joy. I've seen anger. But I've never seen what I just saw." He held up the envelope. "This isn't my story to tell. Whatever Harrison is dealing with, that's his business. But I want you to know something. Celebrity doesn't make you immune to pain. Fame doesn't heal old wounds. Money doesn't erase the past. That man who just walked off this stage, he's human. Just like you, just like me. And sometimes being human means you reach your limit." The monologue would later be described as the most honest 3 minutes in talk show history. Steve didn't read the letter. He didn't speculate. He didn't try to fill the silence with noise. He just acknowledged the reality of what they'd witnessed and gave Harrison Ford something rare in the age of social media: permission to be broken without explanation. The show ended early that night. Social media exploded, of course. Theories ranged from reasonable to absurd. Some said the letter was from an estranged family member. Others claimed it was a message from a former lover. The conspiracy theorists went wild with ideas about government secrets and Hollywood cover-ups, but the truth, as it usually does, remained hidden from the public eye. Harrison Ford spent that night in a rental car, driving north along the Pacific Coast Highway. He'd left the studio through the kitchen exit, borrowed a production assistant's beat-up Honda, and disappeared into Los Angeles traffic before anyone thought to look for him there. He drove for 2 hours without destination, the letter sitting in the passenger seat, its words already memorized, because some things only need to be read once to be carved into memory forever. The letter was from David, his brother. His younger brother, who had always lived in Harrison's considerable shadow, who had struggled with substances and instability and all the demons that fame's proximity can amplify. David had gotten clean 7 months ago. Really clean, not the performative sobriety that comes with court orders and publicity damage control. He'd moved to Montana, found work as a carpenter, started attending meetings in a church basement, and slowly rebuilt a life that didn't revolve around his last name or his brother's achievements. The letter wasn't angry. That would have been easier to handle. Anger can be met with anger or apologies or distance. The letter was grateful. David thanked Harrison for the money that had paid for rehab facilities over the years. He thanked him for the connections that had gotten him opportunities he hadn't deserved. He thanked him for not giving up, even when giving up would have been the logical choice. And then, in the final paragraph, David wrote the words that had made Harrison Ford walk off a soundstage in front of millions. "I forgive you for not being there when I needed a brother instead of a benefactor. I forgive you for choosing your career over my crisis. I forgive you because holding on to that anger was preventing me from being the person I'm trying to become. You don't owe me anything anymore. We're even. I hope that gives you some peace, because I know you've been carrying that guilt like a stone in your pocket for 20 years. Put it down, Harrison. I already have." Forgiveness, when unexpected, hits harder than condemnation. Harrison had spent 2 decades preparing defenses against accusation. He'd rehearsed apologies. He'd made financial amends. He'd built an entire fortress of justifications for why his career had to come first. Why he couldn't drop everything every time David spiraled, why sometimes tough love means distance, but he'd never prepared for absolution. Grace, when you don't believe you deserve it, can break you more thoroughly than hatred. He pulled into a beach parking lot somewhere past Malibu, where the tourists don't usually reach and the locals know to leave people alone. The ocean stretched black and infinite under a moonless sky. Harrison sat in the borrowed Honda with the windows down, listening to waves hit sand, and let himself feel something he'd been avoiding since the 80s. Not grief exactly, not regret, though that was there too. Something more like release. The acknowledgement that he'd been human and flawed, and that his brother, despite everything, had found a way to be okay without his help. Back in Los Angeles, Steve Harvey sat in his home office, still wearing the burgundy suit, staring at nothing in particular. His wife found him there at 2 a.m, asked if he wanted to talk about it. He shook his head. Some moments don't need analysis. They just need to be felt and then filed away in the part of your memory, reserved for things that changed you in ways you can't quite articulate. The episode aired the next week, unedited. The network executives had debated cutting the segment entirely, but Steve had insisted on leaving it intact. The ratings were massive, but more importantly, the response was different than the usual viral moment chaos. People didn't mock Harrison's departure. They shared their own stories about letters they'd received or needed to write, about forgiveness that came too late or exactly on time, about the moment they realized that carrying old pain was a choice and choosing to put it down was possible. Harrison Ford returned to public life 3 weeks later. He did another talk show, made a joke about needing better bladder control, and smoothly deflected every attempt to discuss what had happened that night. The leather jacket was returned to him via courier, professionally cleaned, with a note from Steve that read simply, "Respect." The two men never discussed the incident directly. They didn't need to. Some understanding doesn't require conversation. David Ford continued his life in Montana. He built custom furniture that sold at craft fairs and didn't tell customers about his last name. He went to his meetings. He called his brother once a month, brief conversations about weather and work and nothing particularly deep. But the calls happened, regular as clockwork, which was its own kind of healing. Not the dramatic reconciliation that movies love, but the quiet, persistent choice to stay connected even when connection doesn't come naturally. The letter itself disappeared. Steve never read it. Harrison presumably kept it, though he never confirmed or denied that in the few interviews where reporters were brave enough to ask. Some mysteries are more valuable unsolved. Some stories are more powerful when the ending is left to imagination. What people remembered most wasn't the words of the letter, which nobody except Harrison ever knew. It was the image of a man standing up and choosing himself over performance, choosing authenticity over entertainment, choosing to feel something real instead of managing how that feeling would be perceived. In a world that demands constant performance, constant availability, constant explanation for every emotion and reaction, Harrison Ford's silent exit became a kind of permission slip, a reminder that you're allowed to reach your limit. You're allowed to say, "I need to go," without justification or apology. The moment lived on in compilation videos and think pieces and late-night conversations between people trying to make sense of their own complicated relationships. It became shorthand for a specific kind of courage, the courage to be human in public, to let your armor crack, to walk away from the spotlight when staying would cost more than leaving. And somewhere in Montana, a man who used to be defined by his failures built a bookshelf with his own hands, placed a framed photo of his brother on the top shelf, and felt something close to pride. Not for what he'd survived, though that mattered. Not for the forgiveness he'd extended, though that mattered too, but for the version of himself he was slowly, painfully, persistently becoming. Someone who could write a letter that told the truth. Someone who could let go of anger without needing acknowledgement in return. Someone who understood that some gifts are most powerful when given without expectation of gratitude. The waves kept hitting the sand. The moon cycled through its phases. Life continued with its usual mixture of beauty and brutality, and a blue envelope, somewhere in a drawer or a safe, or maybe even destroyed, held words that had changed two brothers' trajectories without the world ever knowing exactly what they said. Which is perhaps exactly how it should be. Some stories belong to the people who lived them. The rest of us are just grateful to have witnessed the moment when private truth interrupted public performance and reminded us all that beneath the celebrity and the cameras and the carefully managed images, we're all just people trying to figure out how to forgive and be forgiven. How to carry our guilt until we can finally, gratefully, put it down.